Hello, and welcome back to the Empower Her podcast. You took the day off, you canceled your plans, you slept in, and you still feel exhausted. This was me when I left corporate. I thought that leaving corporate when I was extremely stressed, extremely burnt out, that it was going to fix all of my problems, right? When I was in corporate, I worked long hours. I was constantly wired but tired. I was stressed out, burnt out. I started having physical symptoms at the end. And I don't even know how I made it out alive. I literally was doing the most. Rest was not even a word in my repertoire, in my vocabulary, never something that I did. I would be out 4 nights a week, on weekends, working in the office, going to the gym, doing all the things, and do it all over again. And then I wondered why I was exhausted and burned out. So I thought that quitting corporate, I thought that resting, I thought that spending more time at home and alone would be helpful. But newsflash, it was not. It was not helpful because that wasn't my problem. Sleeping more wasn't what I needed. I actually needed a different type of rest that was going to help me restore myself. So what I want to talk about today is what are the different types of rest that there are and how we can actually implement rest into our daily routine and why it's important for our nervous system. So first I want to talk through the 7 kinds of rest because I think it's important for us to first understand that there's more to resting than just sleeping or taking naps. There's also many other kinds of rest that are super important. So the first type of rest is physical rest, and there's a passive and an active version of this. The passive version, which is sleeping, napping, is what we typically think of when we think of rest, right? There's also active rest, which is yoga, stretching, massages, anything where you're resting your physical body and you're helping yourself recover from physical exertion. So this is probably the most common type of rest that we think of when we think of rest, but it's only one of the types of rest that we actually need, of course, depending on what your needs are. The second type of rest is mental rest. So this is rest that we need when we feel like we're constantly on. So having symptoms of mental fatigue, like racing thoughts, struggling to focus or process thoughts, that means you need mental rest. And the things you can do are taking brain breaks, journaling, different mindfulness practices, really helping your mental and your brain rest. The third type of rest is sensory rest. So this is when we're overstimulated either by lights, screens, noise, crowds. Different things you can do is turning off notifications, stepping away from your devices, spending time in the quiet or darkness, or even outside if that's helpful for you. For some people like me, I like to do sensory rest by not being on my phone and laying out in the sun, right? Like that brings me joy and that's great sensory rest for me. So it just depends like what you need. The fourth type of rest is creative rest. So this is where we need to replenish our inspiration. Whether you're feeling in a creative rut, you're feeling like you just have too many responsibilities, your mind is racing. Creative rest can be super, super helpful for this. So it's kind of like, what are those things you like to do as a child even? I think that could be a good way of thinking about it. Spending time in nature, visiting museums, doing something playful like an adult coloring book or, doing arts and crafts. I like to wrap gifts in a pretty way. That's creative rest for me. So whatever it is that really helps with that creative rest. Number 5 is emotional rest. So this is very important for high achieving and neurodivergent individuals because they often feel like they always have to be on or perform or mask. And so having that emotional rest when you have the space to be authentically you and not perform and not mask, whether this is being alone or being with people where you feel comfortable with letting the mask down, that's where we want to do this emotional rest. Number 6 is social rest. So this is taking a break from draining social interactions. It doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have to have any social interactions. It just means that we're taking a break from people that drain us. But for some people, it could mean just being alone and just letting go of the guilt of being alone. And then number 7 is spiritual rest. So regardless as if you're, religious, not religious, this is about connecting to something greater and a sense of purpose. So things you can do are prayer, meditation, being in nature, acts of service like volunteering, really adding that spiritual rest. So now that we kind of went through what the different types of rest are, I also want to give some examples of what rest is not, because I think we can confuse these things for rest. So just a couple of examples. So Netflix and phone scrolling, that is not restful. Laying down with your eyes closed but having your brain constantly race and think a million thoughts, that is not restful, right? These things are what we're told are restful, but they're actually not. And we often say, oh, you just need sleep, you just need a nap. Like those things, yeah, obviously you need sleep to function as a human being, but that's kind of the baseline. Like you don't necessarily need more sleep when you're feeling exhausted, right? It could be that you need a different type of rest. So, an example of this was I was on vacation in June. We were in Italy, and I'm not a morning person. I love my sleep. I like to sleep. But when we were on vacation, we often woke up early because we had things to do. We went around to different cities. We went to explore. Like we had a lot to do, right? And it was not an issue for me to wake up early because I was rested in other ways. I had sensory rest, creative rest, right? Like I was able to have rest in other ways that was actually causing me to be exhausted, not the sleep aspect of it. So it's about understanding like what is it that you and your body actually need, because physical rest isn't always what we need more of. So let's just kind of talk really quickly about the nervous system and how the nervous system affects fatigue and rest. So just a quick breakdown. I've done a podcast episode on this talking about functional freeze, but I just want to mention functional freeze as well as fight or flight in terms of how these affect our feeling of being exhausted. So functional freeze is shutdown mode. So this is when you may be technically functioning, like maybe you go to work, you perform your duties, but then you come home and you feel like you have absolutely zero energy to do anything else. The reason is because you're suppressing your emotions and needs in order to survive the day. You're quote unquote holding it together, which actually consumes so much more energy. And so you're actually not resting when you get home, because when you get home, you're just so exhausted from the day that you're just coasting. You're numb, you're detached, you're going on autopilot. So it's not actually resting. And then fight or flight, kind of the opposite of that. This is when we're hyper aroused. So this is when we're constantly on edge, overthinking, overdoing. Maybe we're like really people pleasing, micromanaging. We're preparing for the worst. We're overthinking basically. Your nervous system is so overactivated that your cortisol may be high. Your body's in survival mode. And this affects your energy because it literally burns through your energy system. It tanks your focus and it affects your sleep and digestion. So then you can't even sleep and you can't even rest, right? This could be that like tired but wired emotional state, right? And if you're in one of these phases, you're going to be stressed and you're going to be burnt out and you're going to be exhausted. But just sleeping isn't necessarily going to fix any of these things. You have to look at the other types of rest as well. So let's talk about why high achieving women are especially susceptible to not resting, right? The first thing is hypervigilance, having this feeling of having to be always on, scanning what needs fixing, right? I always tell my husband, like, if he could see inside my brain or if he could feel my thoughts for even just like an hour, I think he would go insane because my mind works at 100 million miles an hour. I'm thinking about 10 million things at one time. And he would be exhausted. And this is so common for neurodivergent and high achieving women. The next thing is over responsibility. So having this feeling like we need to hold it together for everyone else. So this is about doing the most, doing too much. And the patriarchy, and especially in heterosexual relationships, this is extremely common that women tend to do more and take more of the emotional and mental burden, right? It's something I had to learn, is letting my husband do 50% and not me do 80% and feel guilty about, giving him some of those tasks or having him take over. The next thing that happens, and the reason we get exhausted, is because our self-worth is tied to doing, performing, pleasing, right? I see so many women, and this was true for myself as well for a long time, is our self-worth was tied to our job. And it was tied to what we could give other people. And so when you're constantly feeling like you have to perform, you actually can't rest and you actually can't regulate your nervous system. And then the next thing is like just being like internally gripping. When outside you feel calm, you look and feel calm. Like people will say like, oh, you look so good. People will compliment you. And on the inside you're dying, or you feel so stressed, or you feel, so burnt out. So what are things that we can do, right? Like what are real life examples of what we can actually do to regulate ourselves? So obviously looking at the 7 types of rest and seeing, okay, which are the things that I need? But beyond that, things that we can do that aren't sleeping are like doing less on purpose. So actually cutting back, setting boundaries, doing less. I always say you shouldn't be giving 100% at your job. You shouldn't be giving more than 100% at anything that you're doing, right? 100% is the maximum that you should be giving in any one thing, and you can't necessarily be giving 100% in every aspect of your life. The next thing is like nervous system regulation, things like breath work, walking slowly, getting off screens, right? Like what are those types of rest that you can do that are part of your day? Another thing you can do is tune into your body, not away from it. So what does your body need? What is your body saying to you? What does your body want, right? Having slower mornings, setting boundaries, solitude, like what are those things that you can actually do that are going to help you rest, right? Because that's what's going to help you feel more rested. And what I would recommend is for you to do an audit of your life. Like do an audit of your current rest state, do an audit of your current life. Like what are those things that actually recharge you? What are those things you can start implementing? I recommend 5 minutes a day, just picking one thing at a time, one type of rest, one activity that you can do for 5 minutes every day, and do it for 1 or 2 weeks. See how you feel. And then if it starts to feel good, you start to feel a change, it starts to feel part of your life, then you can move on to adding something else, right? I want to normalize that you shouldn't feel guilty by resting. You shouldn't feel guilty by resting. And rest is not a luxury. It should be a part of your daily rhythm, period, the end. Okay, period, the end. So if you're tired, if you're exhausted, if you're burnt out, please know that you are not lazy, you're not broken. You're just burnt out, and you're probably in, fight, flight, or freeze mode, and your nervous system is completely out of whack. So let's look at ways that we can actually start to have you rest more to get out of those phases. So I want to give you 2 journal prompts to end with that you can start thinking about. You can either do these as a journal prompt, or you can, think them through, but I think it helps sometimes to write them out. So the first one is, where in your life are you pretending to rest but actually still performing? So where in your life are you pretending to rest, but you're still performing? Okay. And the second one is, what does true rest feel like in your body? What does true rest feel like in your body? Okay. Do these journal prompts, see what comes up, and then based on what comes up, you can look at the different types of rest and pick an activity and start implementing one thing at a time. And slowly your body will start to thank you. Slowly your body will start to come out of that fight, flight, or freeze mode, and you'll start to feel less exhausted. It will be a process, but it will happen. It will happen. I'm someone that we went through this, and I feel so much better on the other side, and you can do it as well. Okay. I hope this episode was helpful. If you loved it, please leave a 5-star review. It really, really helps boost the podcast, and I appreciate it as well. And subscribe if you're watching on YouTube. I hope y'all have an amazing week, and I'll catch you in the next episode.